Hello and welcome to this very special edition of Crystal Ball. This is a special one because it is Pankaj Vaish, Head of Global Markets at Citi's last interview. In a sense, it's an exit interview after 9 years of being in India. Pankaj moving on to South America, and over the last many years, he's given us many pearls of wisdom about the markets. This is his last one about how he sees the Indian market from here on. Pankaj, thank you very much for joining in on what will be probably in all senses your last India interview or interview in an India role. How does it feel leaving the Nifty at around 7,000? I mean, after the election result, would you have thought that by this time the market would be a whole lot higher?
I would have thought it would be a whole lot higher. Udayan, when I came here in April of 2007, since then, in rupee terms, we are, let's say, 90% higher or something. But in dollar terms, we're barely higher. And that, to me, sums up a lot of stuff that's going on. Our whole nominal stuff is growing okay. But in terms of where we stand, for the world and for global investors, I think it's been a little bit underwhelming. I think we all wanted it to have done much better. The last government obviously came in with a lot of excitement, and it's just unfortunate that it has not translated into permanent gains across the board. So, and there obviously you can't just fault the government. I think, frankly, if another sort of big picture, lesson I can take away is that the political process is extremely important. I think politicians become a bad word, but actually you need good politicians. And one regret is that I think in India, there's still the sense of my party and my positions rather than what's really best for the overall economy. And that logjam really has to be cleared. I really keep feeling seasoned people across all political parties have to come together. I mean, that's being nationalist, to say, let's do something for the economy overall rather than just my narrow case. And that's very disheartening. I laugh with my friends in New York that I don't know which system is worse, the acrimony in the political system in the US or with Donald Trump and the likes going around, or the kind of noises you hear here. It should have been a lot more cohesive, but that has really taken away the shine. I mean, given what China is doing, it should have been a slam dunk for us, for us to be the undisputed economy in the world. But unfortunately, we've not seized that opportunity that very easily came to our place. So,
do you sense any disenchantment creeping in? Because India was seen as the jewel in an otherwise troubled environment, but increasingly one hears a lot of voices of dissonance saying, we feel a bit let down, and a lot of old India watchers or India backers seem to be also liquidating some India positions. Do you see a sense of disenchantment creeping in?
Yes, there is disenchantment creeping in. I think some of these old India watchers, as I said, they've been long-term friends of India, and nothing would delight them more than India really go on and do extremely well. And time after time, I think they feel that the advice that they've given in terms of reform and in terms of progress it makes us proceed a little bit, but not really make the defining leap that we should be making. And that's been disheartening, because if not now, if not with such clear sort of looks of our situation, then when? And I think another minor footnote I'll make in this is, I know the constitutional experts say Rajya Sabha has a role to play, and all of that is fair. It's the slow-moving average, let's say, of the Indian population's feelings. But practically we know Rajya Sabha is also full of a lot of people who have been done favors to and who just sort of get their seats, and it's trading favors, and that's not really reflective of where the Indian population or the states at large, where they stand today. And so, again, I think a big discussion topic that should go on rather than what's happening at GNU is to say, what is the distribution of power here? And should you really have a few unelected people being able to stall progress? That's really not been handled. And again, I don't think you can just blame any one party for it. I mean, it's also incumbent on the party that has the cards to find the floor management sort of deal-making, for a lack of a better word. That is important as part of governance. So So anyway, I think there's a lot of stuff that could have gone right, and we just don't have any competition right now. This was ours for the taking, and unfortunately, we've let that slip by. I hope there's still time for us to recover.
What's the general sense you get about emerging markets? Because you're moving from one to another in South America, but would you go as far as to say that we are in an emerging market bear market, the way things are panning out over the last few months?
You know, Dan, I think one thing that's become clear over the last few years is that to talk of emerging markets together it doesn't help us too much, because there's such diversion, such diversity of prospects. The love affair of emerging markets is still very country specific. If you, like again, if India had the right political legislative agenda moving forward, I think you would see a lot of people still come into it in tens of billions of dollars a year. I think, yes, the huge excitement that we had in 2007 and then again in 2014, that may have been tempered, but it is still very country specific. Any country which can get its house in order can do really well. For example, in Mexico, actually, the reforms have been quite dramatic. In the third rail kind of sector, like labor reform and energy and telecommunications, that is what I think energy is required. And once their terms of trade turn around, hopefully it'll do better. So I think then, for example, it would be a beneficiary. So it's very country specific, and I think it really depends on that.
Yet you see a lot of capital flowing out of emerging markets. Do you sense that people are getting disillusioned because currency adjusted returns in domestic currencies, people have not really made a lot of money from emerging markets over the last 5, 7, 10 years. Do you think it's finally beginning to rankle?
I always, in fact, used to wonder why currency was not more talked about. I've had these discussions at the highest levels of Indian government, that the currency situation is very important to foreign institutional investors. Like we talked about earlier, that Nifty on a dollar basis has really returned you very little, maybe 2% a year over the last 9 years. And that's why focusing on the currency, the strength of the currency, is extremely important. Latin America actually went through a lot of currency runs, so they have a lot of experience in it. India's not in that sense, because we didn't really have huge amount of FI inflows until about 20 years ago. And yet, when you keep hearing these sounds about let the rupee devalue and it'll help our exports, and I actually wrote a piece in Financial Express saying that our analysts have done some work. This is quite misleading. This RER sort of straitjacket is very misleading. And the kind of exports we have, they're not that sensitive to the exchange rate. So whereas for the whole system, for the importers, you will create problems, as well as for investors, because then they start saying dollar adjusted, I'm not really making any headway. So I think you're right. This is something that they have to worry about. But as soon as you get the Federal Reserve situation in terms of what was initially thought many hikes, that scale back, I think you will see dollar EM also stabilize. And I don't think the Federal Reserve is out to do anything irresponsible at all. It probably made sense that we needed to hike, and I think they did the right thing. But they will do it at a pace not to at least add any additional destabilization to the market, which is already wobbly from so many other issues. I think once that comes to the fore, carry trades and seeing whichever emerging market there are some reasonable fundamentals, people will come back to it, because they're also, for hedge funds, the trade opportunities are very, very thin. 10 years ago, carry trades used to be a very profitable trade, currency carry trades. Brazilian real and the likes, and South African rand were very popular currencies to go long. Right now, people have stepped away because A, the fundamentals are bad, the terms of trade are bad, and B, there is a global risk off. The global risk off, based on what China and Federal Reserve do, I think can stabilize. And then you will see some of those currencies do better. So I don't think long-term investors have signed off of emerging markets completely. I think they're sensibly taking a breather, and they will come back to selective ones when they see risk on.
Do you think 68, 70 is it for the rupee then, or could there be more pain, in the light also of what China is trying to do with its currency?
Well, there's so much pressure from so many sources on RBI that they should let the rupee weaken more, which, by the way, I disagree with. So I think that pressure just means, at least in nominal prices that we watch, you probably will see dollar rupee move slightly higher. But I don't see any vicious sell-off. I hope there is not going to be any panicky kind of a situation. You know that they're constantly there on the bid to come back and build more reserves. And they've taken so much criticism from so many sectors, including the Commerce Ministry and the Chief Economic Advisor. So I don't think they have a choice but to at least steadily buy it if it were to slide towards 67, 68. So yeah, I think that plateau will keep rising higher, but I don't see any panicky sort of move unless China is doing something crazy, and that's a separate topic in itself.
What's your view on Indian fixed income before we turn to equities? Because that's also been in a very tight range. Given the kind of deficit numbers we're looking at, where do you think fixed income returns could be over the next 12 months?
Yeah, Indian fixed income actually has been actually a tale of two different parts of the curve. The short end has done quite well because clearly inflation came off and RBI got a chance to cut rates. Whereas the long end, because of the deficit that you just mentioned, has lagged. It is not a good statement when you have bond yields still hovering where they were before the easing campaign started. That just means people are voting that it has not been managed properly. The fiscal situation has not been managed properly. Frankly, the supply situation has not been managed properly, the auction schedules, the liquidity. And of course, there are people who say that it's also because US 10 years have sold off, but that depends on what your frame of window is. If you go sufficiently far enough, US 10-year yields are far below where they were 2 years ago, or anybody would have anticipated. They've actually had a hike. So I don't really buy that argument, but that gets thrown out quite often. So I think this is definitely a statement that things have not really worked out well for the long end. And it'll still meander. My rates team tells me that the supply situation is not good. FI investors have also, kind of picking up from our prior conversation, gotten a bit tired, frankly, of chasing this, of hearing that there will be stability and there'll be predictability. And now this morning there's some stories about Euroclear, but that also again is going to be a very small section, $3 billion for just the sovereign wealth funds. So it's not been a very easy ride for them, and I think they're tired. There's frankly just fatigue that has set into this, and that may continue for a while longer. I don't see anything on the horizon that's going to change that. Rate cuts will be very slow to come, and that's understandable. But the supply situation and the liquidity situation, people have dug in their heels on that, and I just don't see that helping out.
Quick break. We'll be back with Pankaj Vaish of Citi after the break. You're watching his exit interview on Crystal Ball.